Hello everyone, we're just going to continue this demo where we left off because I don't play as much TF2 right now in this off season, so yeah, it's a little harder to come by demos. But anyway, I want to talk about a phenomenon today, varying between different divisions. So, you know, people always talk about Scout being, you know, the strongest class in sixes, which I'm probably going to do an entire video about what is like the quote-unquote strongest class, because of course every class in TF2 is broken in its own way. But yeah, Scout is usually considered kind of that premier class, and you know, it is the class that is extremely good against demos and soldiers. So it just kind of has a winning matchup against just about every class. On top of the fact that even in those like places where a Scout doesn't thrive, such as, you know, playing against a soldier in an enclosed choke point or something like that, because Scout is so fast, you know, you get to kind of pick your engagements. So you really only have to choose those fights that that you have a winning shot of. So yeah, Scouts of course are very powerful. However, when you go down into lower divisions and lower skill levels in general, the kind of mix-up of what classes are strong or weak kind of falls apart, and it's a lot less clear, which is strange, and I just wanted to talk about that today. So what is different when you go to a lower skill level or a lower division? Well, players have worse DM, they have worse coordination, they have worse game sense, worse decision making, and just overall less experience, which is totally fine. But these changes are not reflected equally through like the meta, as in, you know, while an amateur soldier is not going to be any more knowledgeable of the game than an amateur scout would, at least like, you know, not comparatively compared to if those two classes were represented in a higher div. But an amateur soldier is probably getting a lot better stats than an advanced soldier would against like equal competition, right? Relative to the div, of course. And why is that? Well, in general, at a lower level, Scouts are actually a little... They're definitely less powerful. And soldiers are comparatively more powerful. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, for starters, soldier is pretty easy to be effective at. And in fact, while... Well, it's just easier to be effective as a soldier. You know, people... New players as well, like casual players who just installed the game, are going to find some moderate success on a class like Soldier because, I mean, you just have reliable splash damage. It's easy to do a lot of damage. Now, of course, the class has just near infinite depth, and you can always get better at it, and, you know, it's a wonderfully designed class. But at a baseline level, it is generally easier to get consistent damage with it. And especially like if you understand just basic bombs and whatnot, then you're gonna be very effective if you can find nice timings. But also, I think the bigger component is the fact that all the things that are built up in the metagame in order to deny soldiers and prevent them from just having the world are not so established. A big one being Scouts. In general, like the broken elements of Scouts, I'm so sad that didn't... Man, just a slightly different timing. I don't know. I'm still beat up over that. Yeah, lower level Scouts, they're not going to have as good of movement. They're not going to be as good at abusing high ground, for instance. And they're not going to be necessarily as intelligent about taking fights. So as a result, like a newcomer Scout or something might just be getting too rocketed. Because again, they haven't really figured out all the intricacies, and Scout is a class where you get a lot more success out of the class as you get more experience and get better at it. Because again, like the actual dynamics towards making Scout so good in sixes is generally a matter of the Scout's skill, right? So yeah, Scouts are not going to be as good, and as a result, Scouts are not going to be as punishing to soldiers. So again, comparatively, you have these lower div soldiers going to see more success. But also, another aspect of the game that prevents soldiers from seeing as much success is just team coordination in general. Soldier is generally a timing dependent class in the sense that, you know, when you're taking, so for example, as a roamer, if the other team has ad and are trying to push a point, you're gonna want to be sacking for the medic because you obviously don't want to give up that space for nothing. You may as well take advantage of the fact that the other team is in an awkward position. Maybe they're, you know, they have some disadvantaged positioning because they're getting through a choke point, right? And you want to abuse that fact to potentially get a good sack off and potentially force their Uber so you're not just giving up the point for free. Straightforward, right? But since that's the mechanics, or that's like what's at play, and obviously you don't want to be, or excuse me, you want to be sacking a soldier in these times, then of course, as this trend develops, then the teams that are pushing are going to be absolutely prepared for those soldier bombs and like looking out for it, and as a result it's going to be far less effective. Like a team that's just looking up at the air when you're pushing through Metalworks Alley, for instance, are going to like be way harder to bomb into and get a force on than the teams that are oblivious. So at a lower level, when teams are just not as established or just don't have that that game sense and just haven't built those habits, then yeah, soldiers can just get away with a lot. They can get away with much sloppier timing because it doesn't matter how sloppy their timing is if the other team is equally as sloppy. Generally at a lower level, that just rewards soldiers. So again, another example of, you know, the mechanics in play that keep soldiers in check are a little less established at lower levels. Now, of course, this is just kind of something I alluded to and talked about when I talk about off classes, which is that yes, all the off classes have very obvious counterplay that make them unreliable and inconsistent as full-time classes, but they can kind of prey on lower divs because, again, these players just don't have that coordination and game sense and just quality of play established. So off-classing is gonna generally be more effective in these lower divs. Yeah, and can kind of, again, just prey on them, kind of, for lack of a better term. Or maybe that is an adequate term, all things considered. Yeah, it's interesting how the meta is different at lower levels. Another thing as well is Demo is a very sink or swim class a lot of the time. I think that at low divs, Demo, DM, and AIM are really overemphasized. Now, of course, you can absolutely, well, you're going to see value if you can like use intelligent traps and actually think properly and like play your rotations intelligently and whatnot. But just like trapping basic doors and then just being a DM monster outside of that, you're going to see a lot of success because, again, players have worse movement. They're going to be easier to hit. They're not really going to take their fights so intelligently and may just take a fight against a demo, as in like push their team through a choke that they shouldn't. And they're just going to die to really obvious traps because they're not going to be as good at clearing them. So as a demo, in low divs, DM tends to get pretty overemphasized. As far as medic goes, how does medic differ? I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't know if it changes that drastically. You roll as a med. You can get more kills for sure, because again, players are just worse at killing you. So that is a consideration, but overall, it's not like a different space in the metagame necessarily. But yeah, generally, when you see just super soldier logs, a lot of the time that is coming out of lower divs, and then. Yeah, it's really easy to just get to Rocketed as a scout, but that's something that you tend to see more so in the lower divs because, again, when the players get better at the game, then they're not going to let that happen anymore. And a class like Scout is pretty limitless, so once you start to figure out like what can and can't kill you, yeah, you key into that. So anyway, interesting little discussion here about those differences in the metagame at different skill levels. It generally plays pretty similarly, like of course classes have the same roles, all things considered, but their efficacy does absolutely vary, and yeah, you tend to see this weaker scout class and a stronger soldier class, which is interesting. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time.